hopefully help you figure out what you want to do in life or reconnect you to what you love doing. Each show has a guest who is doing what they want to do, whether it's in their career or in addition to their regular job. Most importantly, we want to help you realize that no matter your age, you too can do what you want to do if you have the will to do it. Now here's your host, Leonard Kaplan.
My guest this week is Daniel Fox, the head of Wondersmith Audio. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hi, Len.
Dan and I know each other through a previous guest of this show, Joe Dulett, who was a former student of mine, and I was the former teacher later on of Dan's son, and it's just a mishmash of connections there.
Of small worldness.
Small worldness. And now, Dan, running an audio studio, you're a producer and you're an engineer. Tell us how you started to where you are today. When you were a kid, you were in high school, or maybe just out of high school, was this your dream?
Nope.
No. Okay.
No, not at all. I'll say my journey to what I do is very meandering, very windy, and even now, as long as I've been doing it, I do a lot of different things, and I'm constantly pivoting. And a lot of people had to make changes during COVID. I'm no different. But even just as my career evolves, things have changed. So it's very much not a sort of like a typical story like, well, I went to school for this and then I did that. It's not like that. So when I was in high school, went to Lynn English High School, Lynn, Massachusetts, and I thought I wanted to be a physics major in college. And I wanted to go to a liberal arts college. I wanted to get a broad liberal arts education, but I wanted to be a physics major. So that's already like kind of unusual. But my dad is a physics teacher, and he was a high school physics teacher and a physics professor later on, among many other things. And my mom is a retired sociology professor. So educators in the family, also musicians in the family. My father's also a musician, and I have two brothers who are professional musicians, and also have a painter in the family. So essentially all this art and science from all angles. But I wanted to be a physics major. And when I was really little, like 10, 11, I wanted to be an inventor. I had all these ideas like the motorized spaghetti fork, which somebody already invented. And, envelopes that, like, when you lick them, they have flavors and things like that. The kinds of things that a 10-year-old would come up with. So I wanted to be a physicist. I went to Vassar College, and I declared physics as my major before I even entered, which is like a really bold move, right? Because you don't have to do that. And then one semester in, I was like, nah, I don't want to do this. I really had very little interest in following through with the physics, the math of the physics, the work of the physics. I was very interested in the concepts. I love to think about things like momentum and velocity and friction and what have you, but I didn't really want to do it.
So now what came to this revelation? How did you come to this? You liked it in high school. You majored in it in college, right? Or did you drop the major?
I dropped the major after one semester.
You did drop the major. Okay. Because you didn't mention quite that part.
Right.
I thought maybe you graduated in it. And now, did you do it in the first place to maybe follow in your dad's footsteps? Did you feel you owed it to him or something?
No, actually not at all. I was genuinely interested. So it wasn't like it didn't come from a place of feeling pressured. It's just what I thought I wanted to do until I saw it in action. And then I was like, okay, that's not for me. But as you'll find out, it's kind of come back around full circle. But so I'll try to do the short version of this. So then there was a series of, just like a lot of college students in a liberal arts school, you try out different majors and you figure out what you like. So I was doing anthropology for a little while, archaeology, and then I ended up in sociology, which ironically is what my mother does. So I was very interested in sociology, and what I ended up graduating with in my bachelor's degree is sociology with a concentration in race and ethnicity. So I was very interested in social stratification, privilege, the history of race, racial injustice and racial politics in America, and all these kinds of things, and also just economic class and um, all that kind of sociological stuff. Same time, while I was in college, I did some interning or work study with kids, teaching in after school setting. And so even though I got credit for that in the sociology department, it wasn't exactly like reading sociology textbooks. It was like literally being in a playground with kids and doing activities and taking them places and all that kind of stuff in Poughkeepsie, New York, where the college was. Sorry, I'm going to turn this off so that I don't make dinging noises. I
That's
can.
okay. Just to let you know, I keep switching to the double view of us because for some reason, even when you're speaking, the camera will switch to me automatically in the middle of your sentence. And I want the audience to know and you that I'm not doing it.
That's fine. Looks good on my end. That might just be the view you're in Zoom. But so I did this stuff. I graduated with the degree in sociology, and then following college for many years, I worked in the nonprofit sector. So um, in addition to kind of other sort of odd things that people do in their early 20s, I mean, everything from I was a mailman for a little while to temp worker doing data entry at an insurance company, and then eventually I worked at the Boys and Girls Club as a I'm trying to remember what my title was. Essentially, I did arts at the Boys and Girls Club, so I did arts and music and cultural stuff. Started up a breakdancing kind of thing where kids could practice breakdancing, and then also we did junk percussion, buckets and found object music. So kind of trying to find outlets for kids that were off the traditional path of music education. And then after a few years of that, I ended up at Zoomix in East Boston, which is also a youth arts, well, it focuses on arts, youth arts nonprofit organization, where I was the director of creative media and technology. And what that meant was I designed programming and curriculum and actually taught it in live sound, studio recording, electronic music production, audio equipment repair and maintenance, and then oversaw some other areas that I didn't teach directly, like video production. And then later on, we had a radio station as well. So all these kinds of media and technology things. All that stuff I just mentioned took me through my 20s all the way until 4 years ago. I'm 45 now. So then I made another career switch and I left the nonprofit sector to focus on my business, which had been going along for several years simultaneously, but just squeezed in the hours that I had left over. And that is the business that I now call Wondersmith Audio, which is audio production of various kinds. And there's more. I mean, I said earlier, I wear a lot of hats, and I do. So it makes it kind of complicated to explain what I do. But essentially, there's all the audio production, and there's teaching. So I teach at Tufts University in the music engineering minor now, which is where the physics comes back. And then I also do consulting work. So I've helped a bunch of schools build systems and rooms, everything from acoustic treatment to multimedia lab setups to studios, live sound systems, churches, middle schools, high schools.
So if I ever get the money, I can hire you to convert my basement into a real studio.
I would love to do that.
That's awesome.
I've done a bunch of those.
That's amazing. A very interesting trajectory. So you actually, it seems you had to try things before you settled on, yeah, I'm going to do this, instead of just thinking about it and settling for the first thing.
Absolutely. Clearly, I've fumbled along the way. And I think one thing that I remember is that when I was like a tween, I remember this kind of impending anxiety that was like, oh, wait, okay, I'm about to be like a teenager, which means I'm like almost an adult. And when you're an adult, you're supposed to know what you're going to do and be all formed and have it all figured out. And that was like terrifying to me. And I remember it, it was
Yeah.
kind of like a hard time. Like I was kind of like, what the heck am I going to like? What is adult Dan? That's a concept that doesn't even make sense.
I think we've all felt that at some points in our lives. Some people, when they're older, there's no timetable on that. Sometimes you doubt yourself, or you're on a path and you wonder if you should be on that path, and you do an about face sometimes, or go into something you totally didn't expect. There are a lot of people who major in one thing and then they do something completely unrelated that was not predicted. I think it's very common, and I think it takes a lot of courage to admit it to yourself and to admit it to your family, and just say, "Yeah, I'm going to do something else." It's your life, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's something I think anybody watching this should know, especially young people, is that like doubting yourself or questioning whether you're on the right track or like where is this headed kind of feelings, like that's just totally normal. And I don't know about anybody else, but I can tell you that for me, I've never got to a place where I was like, oh, okay, well now it's all figured out. And I know exactly what the next 5 years hold. I've got this long-term strategic plan. No, it's all of, figuring things out in the fly, throwing yourself in the fire and trying new things that you're a little unsure about, figuring out what gets you excited. It's a constant process.
I think the key is you did not label yourself, as one thing, and I think a lot of people do that. And I think a lot of people limit themselves in not trying other things because they're afraid, or because other people dissuade them from doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm lucky in a lot of ways that I had the freedom to try the things that I did, right?
Hmm.
And that I did have a supportive family. They weren't saying, "What, you want to work in the nonprofit sector? Like, how are you going to make a living? Or like, you want to be a musician, or
Yeah.
an audio engineer?" Like, I didn't get any of that sort of pushback. So I'm very grateful for my parents for that reason.
Right. Now, in a nonprofit, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not paying yourself, because I found that out about nonprofits, right?
That's correct. So the word nonprofit, it's a little bit of a misleading term, but
Mm.
profit is like, if you think of big companies where they make money, and then they pay all their expenses, and then there's extra money they can make on top of that. And if they have shareholders, it's essentially shared, and the more they make, the more people's bonuses go up and things like that. In the nonprofit sector, it doesn't work like that. And you're governed by a board of directors, and you're funded by grants primarily. um, and there are no shareholders. No one's sharing in the monetary value of what you produce. So typically, you're producing a service, like in youth work. So yes, there is a salary. I did make money. I wasn't like, I wasn't eating out of garbage barrels, while I was in the nonprofit sector. But you know, it, no one's getting, or very few people are getting rich in the youth arts world.
Hmm. Tell us about the business aspect of what you do, because you must have been trained early on while you were going to college, perhaps. Did you take business courses, and when did you start the business exactly? Because you said you wound up in it, and after trying all these other things, but you were already doing it on the side.
The business started, when I say the business started, I mean like actually charging clients for this, self-employed or sole proprietorship business, charging people probably in like 2003 or something like that.
Hmm.
But I didn't know anything about what I was doing. It was total mess. I figured it out as I went. I never took a single business class in my life.
No
And
kidding. Wow.
really not until about 2015 did I get like super serious about it. Like, okay, let's get an accountant. Let's do the books right. Let's think about expenses and, income versus expensive and revenue and so forth, um, and longer range goals. Actually, when I left my full-time job in 2018 at Zoomix, my wife made me make a business plan. She made me,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, oh God, a business plan? What even is that? I don't know how to do that. And essentially the idea is you just try to project out what things are going to look like for a certain amount of time. So in this case, it was like a 3-year business plan. So look at what things look like in right at that moment, and then kind of extrapolate and think, well, how could things grow realistically, like conservatively, realistically, the next year and the year after that and the year after that, and you write it all down, and that's the best guesstimate you can make, and then you compare your actuals each year to how you did in your guesswork, right? And you make adjustments, and that was extremely valuable process to go through. So I have my wife to thank for that.
Tell what it's like to work as an engineer and as a producer with a band, say.
It's super fun for me. So it's this kind of blend of, I mean, you're living in the middle of a creative space and a technical space, art and science and people. And that gets lost a lot of the times when, a lot of engineers, we're all kind of gearheads and we're obsessed with the latest technology and internet news groups and talking about, you know, all the fancy microphones and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're working with people and with artists, and they have vulnerabilities and feelings and ideas and all this stuff that has to be navigated. And if you're going to be making their record, they have to feel good with you. They have to feel comfortable. They have to enjoy themselves. They have to feel like the things that they're good at, they've been freed to do to the maximum. And the things that they're not good at, you're taking care of.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a lot of what I would say producing in the studio is. So, the word producing has become a little bit vague or sort of modified over the years. But when I'm working with a band, what production means is that I'm a producer engineer. So I'm engineering, which means that I am actually setting up microphones and I'm pushing the button and turning the knobs and making sure the recording happens the way we want it to happen. But the production part is all that communication with the artists, um, and helping to create the vision and then translate the vision into the product. So if someone says, oh, I want this like really aggressive rock vocal that kind of, sounds like somebody, um, like a Rage Against the Machine record or something, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
to me in my head, I'm thinking about, okay, the kind of energy and impact that they're looking for. And then what kind of a setup in the room will convey that? What kind of a microphone um, would work there? I might, put a bullhorn out and put a microphone on the other side of it and blend that into a more natural microphone, put it through some sort of saturation or distortion hardware or software. Um, Sorry, things are vibrating here. Um, all in an effort to achieve the vision that they're after. And I think that's what production is. And all along the whole way is making them feel comfortable and like you're handling that part of it.
Usually, at least in biographies that I've read, the producer and the engineer are two separate people. What are the advantages and disadvantages, if any, of being both?
That's a great question. So historically, they were more often separate. And as time goes on, there's a lot of people like me that do both. I think partially that has to do with budgets. It's
Mm-hmm.
just, independent artists just don't have the budgets that, when you think about the heyday of recording in the 80s and 90s or 70s or whatever. So um, there's nothing wrong with them being both, with there being two people doing those. So in that case, there's one more pathway of communication, and that's between the producer and the engineer, because
Mm-hmm.
the producer is working in the creative space with the artists, envisioning, and they might say, the song's sounding really good, but I think it's losing a little energy. Let's bump the tempo up by 3 beats per minute. Or this section here where you have the guitar and the keyboards playing the harmony is kind of so dense that the vocal has no space to breathe. Let's strip it down to just the keyboard part and we'll bring the guitar back for the chorus, something like that. Those are like creative decisions that a producer might weigh in on in during recording. And then the engineer's job is to actually capture that, set up the microphones for the guitar and the inputs for the keyboard to record them in a way that gets the sound you're after. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that that's a bigger team. So a bigger team, more people means more communication, more personalities, and they all have to work together. Being a producer and engineer allows me to move more nimbly. So somebody can hire me and we can talk about all that stuff. It's all under one roof. It's generally more cost effective. It's just less money, per hour to hire one person than it is to hire two.
Have you ever been the producer and not the engineer?
In a sense, yes. So that will happen when there's an assistant. So sometimes if I'm lucky enough to work in a studio, and the studio provides an assistant, if sometimes I bring a colleague, I'll hire a colleague on a session. If it's a bigger session, it's kind of complicated. It's going back to your previous question. One of the cons to being a producer engineer is that you're sometimes running around like a crazy person because it's like, I got to go set up these 7 mics over here and we should have a conversation about what the chorus is going to sound like in the next song. Right. And I can't be in 2 places at the same time. So that can be a little hectic. So occasionally on a bigger session, I'll hire a colleague to help me. And then I get to wear the producer hat a little bit more. And a good assistant in that setting knows when to say, hey, do you want me to go set up those mics on the guitar cabinet while you guys chat? And I'm like, thank you.
What is a remote audio production like for you? Is it more stressful than the studio because you're basically building a studio on set? Or is it more fun, or what's it like?
That's another good question. So I guess also there's 2 types of remote sessions. One is what you're describing, which is remote, meaning that you're in the field in some venue to making a
Yeah,
recording.
like a graduation or some speech by a visiting speaker or something like that.
Sure. The other type, just in case you're curious, and we can talk about it if you want, is when you work with an artist in the studio, but sometimes the producer or people that are weighing in on the process are not present, and they're like on Zoom or interfacing with you from afar. But in the first one, those gigs, it depends on how complicated it is. If you're doing a multi-track recording of live music remotely, it's a lot of work because you're bringing everything, every mic stand, every cable, every microphone, every piece of outboard equipment, every power distribution, your own table, whatever it is that you need, monitoring equipment. So it's a lot of work to set that up, but it also is kind of nice because it's like building something from scratch. You're not stepping into a studio, you're stepping into a blank slate, kind of like building a fort. You're like, okay, where am I going to put this pillow? And the roof is like this. And so that can be exciting or very, very rewarding when it's all done and you break all your stuff down. You built something, you captured something special, then you broke down, you left, and it looks like you were never there. That's kind of exciting too.
That's great. Wow. So young people are watching or listening to this, and what would you advise them on how to enter the music world as an engineer or as a producer?
It's interesting because my path is so unorthodox. So there's kind of a traditional path, which is that you go and you get internships in studios and build your skills that way. And then eventually, you get an assistant gig in a studio and work your way up to being, producer or engineer or whatever. And that's fine. That worked for a lot of people I know. For me, first of all, if you are excited by something, It doesn't matter if it's audio or if it's making pasta. If you're excited about something and you're good at it, that's a really good sign.
Mm,
Okay. If something
it
is
is.
exciting and you can't wait to do it and you're good at it, you should probably keep doing that. And there's a good chance you'll be able to make a living at it. So I've really followed that through. And I was making crappy little cassette recordings when I was a kid. And later on, when I went to college, I was experimenting with like overdubbing my own instruments on like loops and samples. And then I started making hip hop beats. And actually, for about 10 years, that's all I did was make hip hop beats. And then I recorded hip hop vocals. And, if I was the guy that was producing the beats and I could record your vocals, well, all of a sudden, that opens the doors to other kinds of recording. And so I kind of grew it from there. um, I think collaboration also is really important, um, with other like-minded individuals. If you can connect with people that are also interested in recording, and maybe you don't have all the gear, because recording equipment is expensive and you need a lot of stuff. So maybe somebody who has these 5 things and you have these 5 things, and you can share a space together, and maybe work together in a business sense to bring in clients. I think that's also a really great way to do it. But the bottom line is just do it. Just keep doing it. Doesn't matter whether you're using your bedroom or a closet or a warehouse or a studio. Just keep doing something. You will learn a lot. And actually, imperfect spaces are very instructive. You can
Mhm.
learn a lot from them.
That's great. Now, have you ever recorded like a comedy skit or an act or a monologue or anything like that?
Well, I've actually I've recorded a bunch of comedy. In fact, somehow I ended up recording a whole bunch of comedy albums. I did a bunch of work with a comedian named Zach Sherwin, formerly called MC Mr. Napkins. And this is musical comedy, musical hip hop, actually, like very nerdy hip hop with lots of wordplay and um, hilarious stories and stuff like that. And that was great. And it ended up, recording live comedy shows. And I actually produced a bunch of music for comedy albums. So almost like parody songs and things like that. Um, really fun stuff.
Your background is almost similar to George Martin, the Beatles producer, because he did that before he did the Beatles. He did a lot of comedy with the Goon Show and all that.
I didn't know that about him.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
for comparing me to him. That's very generous of you.
No, it, reading about him and seeing interviews made me really always interested in audio and it's just fun. I have a nice microphone right here. That's a $600 sterling right here
Sounds good to me.
with an interface, and I
I'm
don't
on
even.
I'm on an old standby here that you've seen a million times, a RE20
Yes, I've seen those. Yeah, and
broadcast microphone.
so now, does your son want to follow in your footsteps at all?
Nope, not yet.
Nothing.
It's not his thing. And you know what? That's totally fine.
Yeah,
Maybe someday he would be interested, but he doesn't need to be. He'll figure that out for himself, you know.
it's a great thing when a father is just kind of standing there and you're there if he needs you, but you're not pushing him into anything. And because I've seen that a million times as a teacher, you know, fathers and mothers pushing their kids into things that they don't really want to do and they're afraid to quit. And it's just a horror show when that happens.
Pushing doesn't work so well, does it?
No.
It
Mm-mm.
backfires one way or another. Either usually pushing makes a student or a young person stop, and if
Yeah.
it doesn't make them stop, it'll make them resent something about it later on. It's one way or another, it's going to backfire.
Yeah.
And
What in all the things that you do is the thing that you maybe kind of dread,
mm,
if anything?
that's another great question. Well, so I teach at Tufts University, and I spent 17 years teaching audio at the teen level, and then I jumped to higher education. I'm teaching uh, most of the classes that I'm teaching are full of mechanical engineering majors, often
Mhm.
junior or senior mechanical engineering majors. And you've probably heard of imposter syndrome, right? It's like this kind of thing where people feel like, oh yikes, like what am I doing here? Why do I have this job? Am I really qualified? You know, that kind of thing. It's a
Yeah.
it's a very common feeling. I certainly feel that sometimes. And it takes a lot of self reminding and positive self talk to remind yourself you're a different person than they are, and you're here because you bring something to the table that is unique to you, your personality, and your experience. So when I'm teaching mechanical engineers, you know, I'm not a mechanical engineer. I don't have a degree in mechanical engineering. As I told you earlier, I have a bachelor's degree in sociology.
Mhm.
uh, but I'll tell them that, and I'll say that's okay. In fact, I'll learn something from you about mechanical engineering, but they'll learn from my experience as a recording engineer and in all these different facets that I've been telling you about. There's, you know, a great deal that they have to learn from that they don't get in their other mechanical engineering classes. So when you asked me what something I dread, well, you know, getting in there and really putting my head into the curriculum uh, for a class at a, you know, elite educational institution like Tufts, you know, I'd be lying if I just said, "Oh yeah, it's easy. I just show up and I teach them and they learn all this stuff." No, of course, it's not like that. I spend weeks and weeks and weeks preparing curriculum and rereading chapters where I was a little hazy on this concept and I want to make sure that I know it before I teach it to them. And, you know, just sort of practicing if I'm going to do a demonstration, maybe I need to try it at home so that it doesn't fail miserably live. You know, it's or I don't forget the cable I needed to do the demonstration. There's a lot of work that goes into that, and a lot of self doubt, uh, you know, creeps in, and it's daunting. I teach only part of the year, so when I approach the teaching part of the year, I kind of have to like buckle down and hit the books. And at first, that's a little scary,
Mm.
but once I get into it, I'm always rewarded by the learning of it and also the teaching and the student interaction.
So one last question. What about music? Do you have any musical talent? Do you play any instruments? Do you sing? Do you write songs? Any of that?
I do, yeah. So I play bass as my primary instrument. I play drums, drum set. I play electric guitar, guitar in general. I do sing. Um, I write songs. I play keys. Um, and a lot of times when I'm in recording sessions, I get enlisted to play instruments to fill in a blank. It could be like shaker, or tambourine. It could be bass. Um, you know, I think that's also part of that's an important skill for a producer is if you're a musical person, then you can
Sure.
speak both languages.
Wow. Well, you have a lot of hats, like you say, and you're doing a great job at all of them, it seems. What's your
And
favorite one? Last question. Favorite age group or worst age group to teach?
um, I love teaching. I think I think 16 to 18 is a really nice age. Kids are kind of starting to come into their own and be really curious, and see new possibilities for
Hmm.
themselves. I find that really exciting. And I would include both like college freshmen and also like high school seniors in that bracket, that whole age range. And I would say, you know, no big surprise here, but early tweens are a huge challenge, right? Because a lot of times when I'm teaching kids in the like 9 to 12
Hmm.
range, I'm trying to introduce like much more sort of advanced adult sort of topics, and they want to be more independent, but at the same time they're also kids. Their energy is everywhere. They're kind of like, um, you know, they want to have fun. Maybe they don't want to like focus on something that seems academic or scary at first, but so
Right.
it's that challenge of making something that's scientific feel artistic and fun. um,
Great. It is a good age. I like high school the best. Middle school was fun, but it was kind of challenging. It was kind of volatile, you know.
well, we
Well,
we were all volatile at that age, right?
I guess. Well, thank you very much for coming on What Do You Want to Do, Daniel Fox, the owner and the engineer and producer of Wondersmith Audio.
I'm in Acton. I was in Lynn, And I moved to Acton a year and a half ago, where I bought a property with a 200-year-old barn that I'm building a studio in.
I see.
Thanks to Dan Fox for joining me today on What Do You Want to Do from Wondersmith Audio. And until next time with another guest, this is Leonard Kaplan saying so long, and what do you want to do?